kind of understand what's happening there. So green is the felt experience of this other thing that's happening. That's not the way the universe is structured. And so most physicists, there's practically a consensus now that space is not fundamental. And so we're mapping something that's more fundamental into our experience, and we experience that as space. But whether that's different levels of energy or, we don't quite know how to interpret that finding. But what I think is interesting is that if consciousness is fundamental, that finding makes a lot more sense and is actually easier to digest and get your mind around, because it's once again another mapping that our brain does for us and gives us this content, this experience of something that's out there. It's the structure of the universe in some sense, but it's not the way we experience it, and the underlying reality is very different. And so there are many physicists and mathematicians who believe that whatever comes out of the math, whatever geometric shapes and equations come out of the math, that all of those things actually exist in reality. They're not just part of the structure that may or may not come into being, but something like a Decoract, a 10-dimensional shape that clearly comes out of the math. Max Tegmark is a physicist who will say these objects are not just hypothetical and not just possible. If they come out of the math, they exist in reality. That is very hard to make sense of in our current understanding of physics. But if consciousness is fundamental and the structure is describing the different types of felt experiences that arise in the universe, a 10-dimensional structure as a description of a conscious experience or many conscious experiences, that is something we can grasp. I just went on a whole tangent.
Yeah. I love that.
Okay, good.
Yeah. And that image of the Decoract is quite beautiful. Also very interesting to look at.
Yeah, but also even more dimensions of space, which are likely the case. I mean, all these interpretations of the results we see in quantum mechanics, most of them, if not all of them, give us many more dimensions of space than 3. That is kind of impossible to make sense of unless the dimensions are not actually about space in the way that we perceive space.
Yeah. I'm really interested in the overlap between ancient wisdom traditions, knowledge around this, and the emerging science.
Yeah.
You know, in the yogic philosophy, there's this kind of thought of there being 11 dimensions, and I've heard Michio Kaku also speak to this.
Yes, and string theory, M theory.
Yeah, and so it's really interesting when these kind of things come together, and so I want to start to move, you know, how if the possibility, you know, of consciousness being fundamental is real, it really does line up with a lot of Eastern wisdom traditions around the illusion of free will, the self, and that there is a more fundamental aspect of being that is the witness and awareness of any arising and passing away of phenomena and contents in our experience that gives rise to a true sense of freedom.
Yeah.
And so as the show is the Know Thyself podcast, we really like to explore how this is what is the most fundamental aspect in nature of ourselves, which feels as, you know, I have many experiences, and I'd love to hear some of yours where you experience and taste such a depth of stillness, whereas there is the absence of experience, but there is still consciousness floating in a void, it seems.
Well, and what's interesting is if consciousness is fundamental, it actually makes sense that spending more time investigating that first-person experience would enable you to have some insights or give you some direct understanding or knowledge in a way that our current way of understanding the world through science has not been able to. And I'm very interested in that crossover as well.
Yeah. So when you say like sense of self, what are you referring to as most people kind of operate with that notion?